Hello, and welcome back. Tonight, we descend into the eternal night. Below the waves of the Atlantic, where the sun never reaches, a silent war was fought in iron tubes. They called them steel coffins. To the crews, it was a world of cold metal, the smell of diesel, and the terrifying sound of water pressing against the hull. There was no escape, only the dark, the depth, and the long wait for a shadow to pass overhead. Before we dive into the secrets of the deep, if you feel the weight of the ocean, please like this video and subscribe. Hold your breath, we are going down. Fact 1. The Gray Wolves, Wolfpack Tactics. In the vast darkness of the Atlantic, the German U-boats did not hunt alone, they moved in wolf packs. They would wait on the surface at night, their low silhouettes invisible against the waves, watching for the silhouettes of Allied ships. When the signal was given, they struck all at once, turning the ocean into a graveyard of fire and steel. For the merchant sailors, the U-boat wasn't just a ship, it was a ghost that could strike from any direction. It was a cold, calculated hunger that turned the sea into a place of constant terror. Fact 2. The Sound of Death, Depth Charges. For a submariner, the most terrifying sound in the world was the click of a depth charge. These were drums of explosives dropped by ships above, designed to explode at a certain depth. Inside the submarine, the crew had to stay perfectly silent. They would listen to the metal hull creaking under the pressure, praying the next explosion wouldn't crack the iron. Each blast felt like a giant hammer hitting the ship. It was a war of nerves, where men sat in the dark, sweating in the freezing cold, waiting for the ocean to rush in. Fact 3. The Iron Tomb, the 75% death rate. Being a U-boat sailor was the most dangerous job in the entire war. Out of 40,000 men who served in the German submarine fleet, 30,000 never returned. That is a 75% death rate. Most of these men didn't die from bullets. They died when their iron homes became their tombs, sinking thousands of feet into the crushing abyss. Today, hundreds of these steel coffins still lie on the ocean floor, perfectly preserved in the cold and dark, holding the remains of crews who haven't seen the sun in over 80 years. Fact 4. The Enigma Code, the secret signals. The battle under the sea was also a battle of minds. The U-boats relied on the Enigma machine to receive their secret orders in code. They believed their messages were unbreakable. But in the shadows, Allied codebreakers were listening. Every time a U-boat rose to the surface to send a signal, they were unknowingly revealing their location. This was a war of invisible threads, where a single broken code in a quiet room in England could sink a massive submarine in the middle of the ocean. The hunters were being hunted by ghosts in the airwaves. Fact 5. The Black Pit, the Mid-Atlantic Gap. There was a place in the middle of the ocean called the Black Pit. It was a region so far from land that no Allied planes could reach it to protect the ships. Here, the U-boats ruled with absolute power. For days, convoys would sail through this emptiness, knowing that the gray wolves were watching them from below. It was a place of total isolation, where the only thing between a sailor and the deep was a thin sheet of metal. In the Black Pit, the ocean felt infinite, and help was 1,000 miles away. Fact 6. The Smell of Fear, Life inside a U-boat. Life inside a submarine was a sensory nightmare. There were no showers, and fresh water was strictly rationed. The air was a thick, choking mixture of diesel fumes, battery acid, rotting food, and the unwashed bodies of 50 men. Because they stayed submerged for so long, the air became thin and heavy with carbon dioxide. Mold grew on everything, even the bread and the men's clothes. To live in a U-boat was to live in a floating sewer where every breath was a struggle and the luxury of clean air was only a distant memory. Fact 7. The ghost of U-65, the haunted submarine. Among the sailors, whispers spread about U-65, a submarine that many believed was cursed. Before it even launched, several men died in accidents. During its missions, crew members claimed to see the ghost of a dead officer standing on the deck during storms. The sightings became so frequent that a priest was brought on board to perform an exorcism. Cursed or not, U-65 eventually met a violent end, exploding for no clear reason as an American submarine watched from a distance. Some say its ghost still wanders the dark currents of the deep. Fact 8. The depth limit, crush depth. Every submarine has a crush depth, a point where the pressure of the ocean becomes so great that the steel hull collapses like an aluminum can. During depth charge attacks, U-boat captains were often forced to dive deeper than their ships were designed to go. The men would sit in total silence, watching the rivets in the hull pop out like bullets and fly across the room. They could hear the steel groaning and screaming under the weight of millions of tons of water. At that depth, death was only a few inches of metal away. Fact 9. The lonely periscope, the hunter's eye. The periscope was a U-boat's only link to the world above. Looking through it was like peering through a keyhole into a world of fire. A captain would spend hours scanning the horizon, watching for the tiny smudge of smoke that meant a target was near. But the periscope was also a danger. Its wake in the water could be spotted by a sharp-eyed lookout or a low-flying plane. To raise the periscope was to reveal yourself to the world, a brief, dangerous moment of sight before returning to the blind darkness of the deep. Fact 10. The suicide missions, Kaiten torpedoes. In the Pacific, the war under the sea took an even darker turn with the Kaiten. These were Japanese manned torpedoes, essentially underwater suicide bombs. A pilot would be locked inside a small tube attached to a submarine, released near an enemy ship, and tasked with steering the weapon directly into the hull. There was no way to escape. Once the Kaiten was launched, the pilot was already dead. It was a tragic use of technology, where the quiet of the ocean was shattered by the final, desperate act of a human-guided explosion. Fact 11. The U-505 capture, secrets of the deep. In 1944, an American task force did the impossible. They captured a U-boat alive. After damaging U-505 with depth charges, American sailors boarded the sinking submarine before the Germans could blow it up. Inside, they found codebooks, charts, and a working Enigma machine. The capture was kept a top secret. Even the German government thought the crew was dead. For the rest of the war, the Allies could read the U-boat fleet's messages in real time. U-505 became a silent witness, a captured beast that helped lead its brothers to their destruction. Fact 12. The toilet tragedy, U-1206. Not all U-boats were destroyed by the enemy. U-1206 was lost because of a high-tech toilet. The submarine featured a new, complicated plumbing system that allowed it to be used at great depths. However, an officer used it incorrectly, causing a massive leak of seawater and human waste. The water hit the submarine's batteries, creating deadly chlorine gas. The captain was forced to surface directly in front of British ships, where the crew scuttled the boat and were captured. It was a humiliating end for a war machine, proving that even the smallest mistake can be fatal. Fact 13. The Arctic Hell, the Murmansk Run. The U-boat war wasn't just in the warm Atlantic, it was fought in the Arctic Circle. Submarines would wait for convoys carrying supplies to Russia, hidden among icebergs and frozen mist. If a sailor fell into the water here, he would die of frostbite in minutes. The metal of the submarine was so cold it would tear the skin off a man's hand if he touched it without gloves. In the Arctic, the ocean was a white desert, a place of silent ice and sudden fire, where the cold was as deadly as any torpedo. Fact 14. The silent torpedo, electric propulsion. To remain invisible, German engineers developed the G7E electric torpedo. Unlike older steam-powered torpedoes, it left no trail of bubbles on the surface. This meant the target had no warning. The first sign of an attack was a massive explosion that broke the ship's back. It allowed U-boats to strike like ghosts, leaving no trace of where the shot came from. The silent torpedo was the ultimate weapon of the abyss, a tool designed for a war where being seen meant dying and being invisible meant victory. Fact 15. The Goliath Canal, the Panama Threat. The U-boats were so successful that they eventually reached the shores of the United States. In Operation Paukenschlag, submarines sat just miles off the coast of New York and Florida, sinking ships as people watched from the beaches. They even planned to destroy the Panama Canal, which would have cut the world in half. For a few months, the steel coffins turned the American coast into a slaughterhouse. It was a reminder that no ocean was wide enough to hide from the reach of the gray wolves and their hunger for destruction. Fact 16. The Last Surrender, U-977 and U-530. When the war ended, 2 U-boats did something mysterious. Instead of surrendering to the Allies in Europe, they sailed for months in total silence, eventually arriving in Argentina. Rumors immediately began to fly that they had carried high-ranking officials or even Hitler himself to safety. While the truth was more ordinary, the ghost flight of these submarines added to the dark mythology of the U-boats. They were the last remnants of a broken empire sailing across the world long after the guns had gone silent on land. Fact 18. The Underwater Aircraft Carrier. The Japanese built the I-400 class, the largest submarines of the war. They were so big they carried 3 folding-wing bombers inside a hangar on the deck. The plan was to sail these giants across the ocean and launch air raids on the American mainland. They were a terrifying vision of the future, a hybrid of sea and air power. Though they were never used in a major attack, the I-400s proved that the submarine was evolving from a hidden hunter into a massive strategic platform of global destruction. Fact 18. The Deep Sea Jungle. U-boats in the Indian Ocean. A group of U-boats known as the Monsoon Group operated in the Indian Ocean, thousands of miles from Germany. They spent months at sea, their hulls covered in tropical barnacles and their crews suffering from heat and exotic diseases. They traded technology with the Japanese, exchanging uranium and jet engine plans for rubber and tin. This was the longest-range submarine operation in history, a journey into the unknown where men were forced to endure the extremes of the planet inside a cramped iron tube. Fact 19. The Human Cost, the families left behind. For every U-boat that disappeared into the blue, there were 50 families waiting on land. Because the missions were secret, a family often wouldn't know their son or husband was dead for months. The German Navy used a specific phrase, missing, presumed lost. For thousands of mothers and wives, the ocean became a wall of silence. They would stand on the docks, watching the horizon, waiting for a ship that was already resting on the bottom of the sea. The tragedy of the U-boats wasn't just under the waves, it was the empty chairs left at home. Fact 20. The Eternal Silence, the Resting Fleet. Today, the ocean is quiet. The U-boats that remain are now protected war graves. In the deep pressure and the freezing cold, the steel has become a part of the seabed. If you were to visit them today, you would see a world frozen in time. Shoes, plates, and the personal belongings of young men scattered in the sand. They are monuments to a war that was fought in the dark, a reminder of the thousands who went into the deep and never came back. The steel coffins have finally found their peace in the eternal shadows. Conclusion: the peace of the deep. The sonar has stopped. The pressure is gone. The ocean is still. As you drift into sleep, imagine the weight of the water lifting away. The ghosts of the abyss are at rest, and the deep sea is only a dream. Sleep well, for the world is quiet, and the tide is at peace.